Okay. Hi everybody. This is Miss Lehman, and it is Saturday afternoon, and I just finished reading all of the reading journals and the study questions. And one of the drawbacks of having midterms or exams is that it kind of interferes with the flow of the class, and we didn't have time to really connect some of the big ideas that I would love to have a chance to talk about with you all. In a perfect world, we'd be able to have a discussion either Tuesday after school at homework club until about 3, or Wednesday after school, possibly till about 3, but possibly later. So if that sounds good to any of you, I would love to have a chance to talk to you, to really have a discussion, because I think that's a good skill. And I think especially the people who did the double entry journals, it would be interesting to have an opportunity to do that. But I did want to bring up a couple points from that individual people raised. And of course it's in isolation, so I have the opportunity to read and appreciate what you said, but nobody else does. So I wanted to talk to you about this. Sorry, I'm holding my head funny. If I tip it, we get a lot of glasses glare. So I have some notes on a piece of paper from your journals, and I wanted to bring them up. One of the big ones that a couple of you brought up, I think Xing Yao was the one who really used the tribes passage, where he realized, a couple of you, I think Dylan mentioned that too, maybe, but talking about one of the big realizations of the book was that Junior wasn't just an Indian. He wasn't just Spokane. He also belonged to a whole tribe of other people. And Kelsey mentioned early on how hard it was to read about the prejudice and the separation, because after all, we're all humans and we all experience the same emotions. Essentially we all live and we all die, and we feel and we bleed and all those other things essentially the same. And I do think that's a huge message in the book. And I think it's also something that Sherman Alexie worked really hard to show in a realistic way, that at first when Junior went through his whole experience, he was seeing himself as someone who was different and increasingly not welcome in either of his two worlds. The tribe certainly didn't want him back. They were angry at him for wanting to leave. And then the transfer was that certainly when he first got to Riordan, he didn't feel welcome there as well. But I think as the book goes on, and a lot of you chose that passage about poverty, when the cartoon where how do you tell people you're poor, and then talking about how staggered he is that Roger and Penelope are both very nice to him when they find out that he's poor. And when what does he say? Something about when you open up a little bit and let people come in, they can be really wonderful. And I think that one of the things Sherman Alexie was trying to point out was that all people go through the same struggle about their identity and about how to fulfill their dreams and how to make their lives what they want them to be. He obviously was also focusing on the particular struggles and the particular situation that Indians find themselves in. And as most of you zeroed in on, and certainly in your exam essay, we asked you to discuss a challenge, which many of you chose, was alcoholism. And that, so I think he is really trying to both educate outside people to the unique situation that a Native kid finds himself in, and the unique situation on a reservation, But I also think one of his messages is, and I would argue not at all in a sappy way. Not all of you would agree with that. Some of you might disagree, and I know Tarzan had some very strong feelings about the way the book was written, which is one of the things I'd like to have a chance to discuss. But I do think that passage where he had the sort of the vision about the tribes that he belonged to, and the things that gave him joy, was a huge unifying discovery. And the fact that Penelope had dreams and wanted to move on with her life, and the fact that that she also struggled with bulimia, that she had some characteristics that his father had as an alcoholic, that Penelope, as a bulimic, I hope that made sense and none of you are going, Penelope was an alcoholic, but she was a bulimic, and that was also a way to deal with stress and anger and sadness, and it was another way to that everybody had troubles. And one of the things that several of you noticed was, Nolan talked about this in particular, the idea that the realization that people could be wonderful, and people did face the same struggles, or the process of struggling is the same regardless of what you're struggling with, and the idea that he comes to value the closeness of his own family, and the way that on the res you know everything about everyone and you can support them, and the way that when his grandmother dies they put aside their anger and their outrage at what Junior is doing, and they come to support Junior's family in the loss, because it's really a loss of someone that's important to them as well. Whereas he talks a little bit about how many families in Welpinit seem really, in Reardon seem really isolated and distant. And of course, Penelope's dad is not a really ideal individual either. And he and Gordy are very similar, that they're both weirdos, in quotes, and stuff like that. So I think those points were really good. Another thing that a couple of you brought up, Keeley and it might have been Dylan. I can't quite remember. I think it might have been Kevin, actually. Talked about, but anyway, somebody out there made a really nice point about the game, and about that big final game against Welpinit, when Junior is so ecstatic that they win, and he's all revved up, and he's kind of high on testosterone, and he's kind of putting in their faces, and then he has this sudden awareness that he has helped Goliath win, that he has helped the big guys with everything on their side continue to have everything on their side, and how painful that is for him to realize, and the whole question of betraying his identity. And I think that that's a brilliant, you're going to hear some weird noises because my two cats are currently fighting in the study. So you may hear some screaming, cat screaming. But anyway, that I think is a brilliant way that Alexi shows how torn Junior is with these two sides of identity. And I think, if we're honest, a lot of us could talk about times in which our two identities have been torn. I think frequently we don't want to share that kind of honesty about our situations, but I do think that particular game where Junior wants something to succeed, he works so hard to make it happen, and then he also realizes how devastating it is to the people that he cares about, that he is part of, is one of the most powerful things about the book. Two other things in closing. We're coming up on 10 minutes, and if you're still with me, that's pretty good. But I did want to mention, on a lot of people's reading journals, at some point I wrote crab in a bucket syndrome. And with my AP students, I read a book called Hope in the Unseen. You're welcome to borrow it if you'd like. It's a fascinating book. And you can borrow it and skim it if you want. About a young man who grows up, it's nonfiction. He grows up in the projects in Washington, D.C. He's African American, and terrible school, et cetera, et cetera. He really pushes himself through it. He has this dream to go to MIT. He ends up getting into Brown University, and which I went to graduate school there and felt like there were a lot of very, very wealthy, privileged people going to school there. And I can only imagine, as this book describes, what a black kid from the inner city felt like. And there's a syndrome, there's a little bit in the beginning about his high school, and the teachers there talk about crab in a bucket syndrome. And they talk about how when one student in a really challenged situation tries to excel, tries to remove him or herself from that challenged situation, the other kids, the other people, will try to pull that kid back down. That they might make fun of him or her, they might pick on him or her, they might actually beat him or her up. And the comparison, the metaphor, is that if you put crabs in a bucket, when one of them begins to climb out, the others will grab that crab, and in their desperation to also get out, they'll pull the other crab down. And so I do think that that is something that obviously you see very clearly in Absolutely True, and something that he definitely has to struggle with. And it is not unique to a Native American situation. And it can even be something that you may experience in your own life in a particular situation. When we've had kids who've come out of rehab for trying to deal with any kind of addiction, one of the first things that they're told is to stay away from the people that they used to practice that addiction with, because those people frequently want to encourage that person to get back into the old ways. And so, that's what I meant by writing crab in a bucket on all of your papers. And I don't know as I can remember what my last point was. But I do encourage you, I do remember what it was. A couple people have asked me or told me that the Children of the Plains and this book have made them wonder what we could possibly do to help the schools on the res or students on the res. And that certainly is something we could look into more. There are links with the Children of the Plains broadcast where they link you to various reputable charities that we could look into. And as we talk about service learning projects, that might be something that we might consider, even though it's not a local issue. But it's certainly something that we might consider. Or, you could also talk to your family, or it could become a personal something that you're involved in. And that would be fantastic. And I also encourage you to look into Sherman Alexie a little bit. He has a website that has some biographical information, has some interviews with him. He talks about Absolutely True Diary. There are a lot of interviews with him about Absolutely True out there. And you have an opportunity to hear from his own mouth what his experience was and how much he is like, or he is Junior, and how much he isn't. And I think that firsthand experience is one of the great things about having these wonderful little white boxes. All right, well, I hope that we can have a whole class discussion or a whole group discussion with anybody who'd like to stay after school, either on Tuesday or Wednesday. Let's talk on Monday about which day will work better. And even if you just have a chance to stop and talk for a few minutes, that would be a good thing. All right, I hope you enjoyed the book, and I hope we have an opportunity to talk about it. Thank you. Good night.